"Can I stay small like this?" asked the alien princess. The queen turned away. The sky above the kingdom of Solara was not the sky of ordinary worlds. It was painted with strange lights, streaks of violet and gold swirling through clouds of deep, endless black. Stars shone like scattered crystals, but some burned with colors unseen by human eyes. From among these cosmic flames came a small figure, drifting like a whisper through the sky. The figure was a princess, tiny, delicate, and not of this world. Her skin glimmered faintly, like moonlight on water, and her eyes held the depth of distant galaxies. She floated gracefully, her hands reaching toward the world below, uncertain yet fearless. She was called Leora, the alien princess, and though she appeared small and fragile, there was something in her gaze that spoke of power far greater than her size. Below her, the kingdom sprawled in grand shadows. Towers of black stone rose like jagged teeth, their spires piercing the heavens. The castle of Queen Solara sat at the heart, cold and majestic. It was a place of beauty, yes, but also of fear. Every wall, every window whispered secrets of old magic and unspoken sorrow. The queen herself, Solara, was a figure both revered and feared. Her presence alone could command loyalty, yet she carried centuries of solitude, her heart locked away behind walls of pride and pain. When Leora landed, the earth beneath her tiny feet trembled. She had not come for conquest or power, but for something far simpler, curiosity. She wanted to understand this kingdom, and perhaps in some quiet corner to find a place where she could simply exist, small and unseen, if only for a while. The guards noticed her first. Towering figures clad in armor, eyes sharp with suspicion, they approached. But as they reached for her, Leora's voice rang out, soft but clear. "Wait," she said, a note of wonder in her tone. "I mean no harm." Her words seemed to ripple through the air. Even the guards hesitated, unsure how to respond to a creature so tiny, so otherworldly. It was not fear that held them back, but something unfamiliar, something that stirred a memory deep within the ancient stones of the castle. The queen, Solara, observed from her high window. She had heard rumors of this small, mysterious visitor. Some claimed the princess could command the stars themselves. Others whispered that she was part of a prophecy, a small one who would challenge the throne. But Solara had learned long ago to turn away from such tales. Prophecies were dangerous. They promised hope but often brought ruin. Yet, as she watched Leora step forward, so fragile yet unafraid, Solara felt an unexpected stir within her. It was not fear, nor anger, nor curiosity exactly. It was something like longing, but quickly she turned away, unwilling to confront it. Leora wandered into the palace courtyard, marveling at the shadows that danced along the walls. Each corner held secrets. Statues of long-dead queens glimmered in the twilight. Fountains whispered with the sound of flowing water, though none seemed to know the source. The princess's small hands brushed against the cold stone, feeling the pulse of magic that lingered in the air. She paused near the great doors of the throne room where Solara's presence was strongest. The doors were massive, adorned with carvings of stars and moons and creatures not of this world. Leora looked up, craning her tiny neck. "Who lives behind these doors?" she whispered. Her voice was carried upward, as if the castle itself wanted to hear it. Solara in her high chamber did not answer, but she felt the words pierce through the stillness of her solitude. She imagined the small figure below, so tiny, yet so full of life. And for a fleeting moment, the queen wondered what it would be like if someone so small could step into her world, not as a threat, but as a companion. The palace guards finally brought Leora before the throne. She looked up, eyes wide, and spoke again. "I am Leora," she said, her voice steady despite her size. "I come with no desire to harm, I only wish to understand." Solara sat upon her throne, the silver crown gleaming under the dim lights. Her eyes were sharp, cold, and unreadable. She did not speak, and the silence that followed was heavier than any storm. Leora's gaze met the queen's, and in that moment the air seemed to thrum with energy. Something ancient, something unspoken, passed between them. The tiny princess felt it, a weight of centuries of duty, of loneliness. And for the first time she felt a trace of fear, not for herself, but for the heart she saw behind Solara's eyes. "Can I stay small like this?" Leora whispered, more to herself than to the queen. Solara's lips pressed into a thin line. She did not answer. She turned slightly, her face shadowed by the crown, and for a long moment the small figure below waited. The queen's refusal to respond was not cruelty. It was caution, a shield born from pain and the fear of losing what one dares to desire. Leora, undeterred, began exploring the throne room, careful to avoid stepping on the intricate mosaics that covered the floor. Each tile told a story: wars fought, loves lost, kingdoms risen and fallen. She traced a tiny finger along the cold stone, feeling a strange connection to the history around her. The guards watched warily, unsure how to respond to a creature so small, yet so strangely powerful. Some felt an inexplicable pull toward her, a gentle warmth that softened even their most rigid hearts. But others only felt unease, sensing the whisper of destiny that often accompanies the arrival of someone fated to change the world. Leora climbed onto the edge of the throne dais, looking up at Solara. Her voice, though soft, carried an unexpected clarity. "Do you always turn away?" she asked, tilting her head. The queen's eyes narrowed, but she did not look down. Solara's heart, long encased in ice, felt an unfamiliar tug. She knew that answering would be dangerous. To acknowledge Leora might mean opening a door that could never be closed. And yet to remain silent felt equally heavy, as if the weight of centuries pressed down upon her chest. Leora sat on the floor, small and vulnerable, yet radiant in her courage. She had come not to conquer, but to see, to learn, to be part of something greater. And the queen, watching her, felt something shift, a seed of curiosity, a glimmer of hope buried deep beneath the cold surface of her heart. The castle seemed to hold its breath. Even the shadows, dancing along the walls, paused, waiting to see what would happen next. The stars above flickered, as if acknowledging the small figure within the great halls. And then, just as Leora leaned forward, reaching out in silent appeal, the queen rose slowly. Her movements were measured, regal, and intimidating. She did not speak, but her eyes caught Leora's, conveying both warning and fascination. Solara turned away again, leaving the small princess staring after her, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. Leora whispered once more, almost to herself, almost as a question. "Can I stay small like this?" The echoes of her words hung in the throne room long after the queen had left the dais. And somewhere deep within the shadows of the palace, something ancient stirred, as if the very stones themselves recognized the arrival of the small one who might, one day, change everything. The night deepened, and Leora, tiny but unbroken, made her way to the edge of the great hall. She felt the weight of the kingdom pressing around her, yet in her smallness she also felt a strange freedom, the freedom to explore, to wonder, and to perhaps, in time, touch the heart of the queen who had turned away. Above, the stars shimmered, and in their light Leora saw a path, uncertain, fraught with danger, but illuminated with possibilities. And for the first time, she felt the quiet thrill of being small in a world so immense, yet holding the power to leave an indelible mark. The castle of Queen Solara was alive with quiet whispers that night. Candles flickered in the high halls, throwing long shadows against the stone walls. Each shadow seemed to move on its own, stretching and shrinking as though breathing. The palace had been quiet for centuries, but the arrival of Leora, the tiny alien princess, had stirred something deep within the ancient stones. Leora walked carefully along the corridors, her small feet barely making a sound. She had learned to avoid the guards for the moment, preferring to explore the palace's secrets. Her curiosity was like a spark, drawing her toward places most never dared to go. The throne room had been imposing, yes, but the rest of the castle was a labyrinth of wonders and dangers. As she wandered, Leora came across a set of heavy doors, carved with strange symbols that glowed faintly in the candlelight. She hesitated, feeling a shiver of both fear and excitement. Something about these doors seemed alive. She reached out, tiny fingers tracing the carvings. The doors opened before her touch, revealing a long hallway filled with statues of queens long past. Their faces were frozen in expressions of pride, sorrow, and anger. Leora felt a strange pull toward them, as if their eyes were watching, judging, or perhaps waiting. She stepped forward, careful not to disturb the mosaic floor beneath her. Each tile told a story: a queen who had fought for her people, a king who had betrayed his love, a palace that had risen and fallen countless times. Leora felt the weight of history pressing around her, but she also felt a connection, as if the spirits of the past were acknowledging her presence. Suddenly, the shadows along the walls shifted. One of them stretched longer than the others, moving independently of the light. It coalesced into a creature of dark smoke and glowing eyes. It hissed softly, a sound that sent a tremor through the air. Leora froze. She had never seen anything like it before. The shadow creature slithered toward her, its form shifting and twisting like liquid darkness. She realized immediately that it was bound to the palace and perhaps to the queen herself. I don't mean to harm anyone, Leora whispered, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. The shadow paused, almost as if considering her words. Then it lunged forward. Leora's instincts took over. She darted along the wall, using her small size to her advantage. The shadow seemed too large to catch her, but it was clever and fast. She ran through corridors, leapt over broken tiles, and finally found herself in a chamber filled with mirrors. The shadow entered the room behind her, but the mirrors multiplied its image, confusing it. Leora climbed onto a pedestal, her small hands gripping the cold stone, and whispered a quiet plea to the stars. "Help me," she murmured. The mirrors shimmered, reflecting the light of something unseen. The shadow faltered, hissing in frustration. In that moment, Leora realized that her smallness was not weakness, it was her strength. She was able to move where the shadow could not follow, to hide where it could not reach, to survive when others would have been caught. The creature recoiled and finally retreated into the darkness of the halls, leaving the chamber silent once more. Leora sank to the floor, breathing heavily, her heart pounding with both fear and exhilaration. She had faced something dark and dangerous and survived, not with strength of arms, but with courage, wit, and her tiny size. Meanwhile, Queen Solara had been observing from her private chambers. She had sensed the disturbance in the castle before anyone else, felt the shadow stir, and now saw its retreat. But it was not the shadow that held her attention. It was Leora. The small princess had faced the darkness and survived. She had done what Solara herself could not. She had moved through the shadows without fear. And yet the queen also felt a flicker of anger. Why did this tiny, fragile being stir such emotions in her? Why did her heart, long locked away, feel a pull toward someone so insignificant, and yet so important? Solara turned away, her face hidden in the shadows, unwilling to admit the strange longing that had awakened within her. Leora, unaware of the queen's gaze, continued exploring. She had found a set of spiral stairs leading to the upper towers of the castle. The air was cooler here, and the wind whispered through cracks in the stone. She climbed carefully, each step a tiny victory against the weight of the massive castle. At the top, she reached a balcony that overlooked the kingdom. The city below was bathed in silver light from the twin moons, streets twisting like veins through the dark. She felt a wave of awe and loneliness at the same time. She had come from a world of stars and freedom, and here she found a kingdom beautiful yet cold, ruled by a queen who seemed untouchable. "I wonder," Leora whispered, leaning over the balcony, "if anyone here ever feels small like me?" Her words were carried away by the wind, and for a moment she felt utterly alone. And then a shadow passed across the balcony, Solara's cloak moving silently. The queen had come, though Leora had not heard her approach. "You should not be here," Solara said, her voice calm but firm. Leora turned, eyes wide, but she did not step back. "I did not mean to disobey," she said softly. "I only wanted to see." Solara studied her, the moonlight casting silver highlights across her face. There was something in Leora's gaze that reminded the queen of herself long ago, a longing to see the world, to understand it, to carve a place in it despite the dangers. "You are fearless," Solara said finally, "or foolish." "Perhaps both," Leora replied with a small smile. The queen's expression softened, though only slightly. She looked away, staring out over the kingdom. "Fearless or foolish, sometimes the difference is small. Too small to see until it is too late." Leora stepped closer, her tiny hands reaching out. "I do not wish to bring danger, only to be here even a little, to understand you." Solara's chest tightened. She wanted to turn away again, as she always did when emotions threatened to overwhelm her. Yet something in Leora's presence disarmed her. The small princess radiated a quiet courage, a lightness of being that Solara had almost forgotten existed. For a moment the wind seemed to pause, and the moon's silver glow bathed them both in pale light. It was a moment of fragile connection, and neither spoke, fearing to shatter it. Then, as if to remind them of the dangers that always lingered, a ripple of darkness spread across the castle. The shadow creature had returned, larger and more menacing. Its smoky form drifted along the balcony, searching for the small intruder. Leora froze. The creature had learned from their previous encounter. It hissed and stretched, reaching for her, its smoky tendrils curling toward her tiny body. "You must leave," Solara commanded, stepping forward. Her voice rang like steel, and the shadow paused. For the first time it seemed afraid, or at least cautious of her. Leora looked at the queen. I do not want to leave. You have no choice, Solara said. This shadow, it is bound to the castle. It will not rest until it destroys you. Leora swallowed, her small chest rising and falling rapidly. But then, with quiet determination, she whispered to the stars above, calling on the unseen forces of her home world. The light of her eyes grew brighter, reflecting the silver moons, and the shadow recoiled, hissing in confusion and pain. Solara watched, astonished. The tiny princess, so delicate, had summoned a power even she had not expected. And for the first time in centuries, Solara felt a flicker of something she thought lost forever. Awe. The shadow finally dissipated, retreating into the dark corners of the castle. Leora collapsed to her knees, trembling but triumphant. Solara approached slowly, unsure if she should offer comfort or reprimand the small figure. "You are remarkable," the queen admitted, her voice soft, almost unrecognizable to herself. Leora looked up, hope and fear mingling in her eyes. "Do you approve?" she asked. Solara did not answer immediately. She turned away, hiding her expression. Her heart was a storm of conflicting emotions, admiration, fear, longing, and something she could not name. "You may stay," she said finally, though her words were cautious, measured. "But you must understand, this castle is not a safe place for someone as small as you." Leora nodded eagerly. "I understand. I will be careful." Solara's eyes softened slightly. "See that you are, and do not ask me for more than I can give." The small princess smiled, a mixture of gratitude and mischief. She had survived the shadows, faced the dangers of the castle, and earned the queen's acknowledgement, however cautious it might be. And yet, even as she settled into the safety of the moment, both of them knew that this was only the beginning. For the castle was alive with shadows, secrets, and whispers of prophecy. And in the heart of it all, a fragile bond had begun to grow, between a queen who had turned away and a tiny princess who refused to leave. As the night deepened, the castle seemed to breathe around them. Leora curled up near the base of a statue, her small form glowing faintly in the moonlight. Solara retreated to her chamber, glancing back once before closing the door, her mind unsettled by emotions she had long denied. The shadows whispered and shifted, the wind carried secrets down empty corridors, and the stars above glimmered with the promise of trials yet to come. The small princess had arrived, and the dance of shadows had begun. And somewhere, deep within the castle, something ancient stirred, sensing that the bond between the queen and the small one was more powerful than anyone could foresee. The morning light in the kingdom of Solara was pale and cold. Silver beams filtered through the tall, narrow windows of the castle, casting long shadows across the stone floors. Leora stirred, waking from her small perch near the base of a statue in the throne room. Her tiny body stretched, and she blinked up at the towering pillars that surrounded her, feeling both awe and the faintest trace of fear. The night had been quiet after the shadow had retreated, but the memory of its smoky, curling form lingered in her mind. She had survived, yes, but she knew that darkness still whispered through the castle halls. And above all, she could not stop thinking of the queen. Solara had not spoken to her after retreating to her chambers the night before. The small princess had waited, hoping for even a glance, a sign of acknowledgement. But the queen remained distant, regal, and unknowable. Still, Leora felt a strange connection, a thread of something tender and dangerous that tied her to the ruler of this vast, cold kingdom. Leora moved carefully through the castle, keeping to shadows, listening to the echoes of footsteps that seemed almost like whispers. She discovered a hidden staircase leading to an upper wing of the palace that was rarely visited. The walls here were lined with old tapestries, faded with time, depicting battles, celebrations, and scenes of queens and kings interacting with strange celestial beings. Leora's eyes widened as she traced the patterns. Each tapestry seemed to tell a story of sorrow, courage, and love lost and found. "This castle, it carries so many stories," she whispered to herself. "I wonder if the queen remembers them all." Her small hands brushed against one of the tapestries, and a spark of energy passed through her fingertips. The threads shimmered faintly, as if recognizing her touch. Leora felt a warmth in her chest, a connection to the castle and the queen that she could not explain. Just then footsteps echoed from behind. Leora froze, instinctively shrinking further. The sound was deliberate, careful, controlled, clearly someone who knew the castle well. She turned slowly, and there stood Solara, her presence commanding and impossible to ignore. The queen's silver crown caught the light, glinting like frost on a winter morning. "You are wandering where you should not," Solara said, her voice calm but edged with warning. "I only want to understand," Leora replied softly, her small voice steady. "I want to learn about this place, about you." Solara studied her, her expression unreadable. She felt a pull toward the tiny figure, a mixture of admiration, fear, and something she dared not name. "Understanding can be dangerous," she said, "especially for someone so small." Leora stepped closer, undeterred. "Then perhaps I should be careful," she said, "but I do not wish to hide. I want to be here with you." The queen's chest tightened. She wanted to turn away, to retreat behind her walls of pride, yet she felt herself drawn to Leora. There was a courage in the small princess, a lightness that Solara had long forgotten existed. And though she tried to resist it, the queen's heart stirred with something fragile and dangerous. Hope. "You are fearless or foolish," Solara said, almost as if testing herself as much as the princess. "Perhaps both," Leora replied, a small smile touching her lips. "But I am not afraid of you." The queen's eyes softened, just a fraction, and for a moment the two regarded each other in silence. The castle itself seemed to pause, as though holding its breath for what might come next. "You are curious," Solara said finally. "Curiosity can be useful. But it can also bring you harm. Do you understand that?" "I do," Leora said quietly, "but I wish to stay even if there is danger." Solara looked at her long and hard. There was something about Leora's determination that unsettled her. The tiny princess radiated courage and warmth, a lightness Solara had not felt in centuries. And yet there was also a danger, the danger of attachment, of desire, of opening a heart that had long been locked away. "You may stay," Solara said slowly, her voice careful and measured. "But you must follow my rules. You are small, and the castle, it is not forgiving." "I understand," Leora said, bowing slightly, her small form proud and unafraid. For days, the small princess wandered the castle under the careful watch of the queen. She discovered secret passages, hidden chambers, and balconies overlooking the kingdom. She learned to avoid the shadow that still lingered in the halls, always aware that it could return at any moment. The queen, for her part, began to teach Leora quietly, guiding her through the ways of the palace and the responsibilities of leadership. Solara showed her the importance of observation, patience, and subtle power. But the lessons were not just about the castle. They were about life, trust, and the delicate balance between strength and vulnerability. During these lessons, the bond between them deepened. Leora admired the queen's strength, her regal presence, and her wisdom. Solara, in turn, was fascinated by Leora's innocence, her courage, and the way she could see the beauty in things the queen had long ignored. Yet tension always lingered. Every moment of closeness carried the weight of unspoken rules and dangers. Leora longed for Solara's approval, for a touch, a glance, some acknowledgement that she mattered. And Solara struggled with emotions she could not name: fascination, desire, fear, and the terror of letting someone so small into her heart. One evening, as twilight settled over the kingdom, Leora and Solara found themselves alone in the queen's private gardens. The air was cool, and the scent of night-blooming flowers filled the space. Fireflies danced in the shadows, casting tiny lights across the stone pathways. "You like this place," Solara said softly, her gaze following the tiny figure as she moved carefully among the flowers. "I do," Leora replied. "It feels alive, like it has a soul." Solara remained silent for a moment, watching her. "It is alive," she said finally. "More than most people know, this castle it remembers. It responds to those who enter its halls, even you." Leora stopped, looking up at the queen. "Me?" she asked, surprised. "Yes," Solara said, her voice quieter now. "You are different. Your presence, it stirs the castle, and perhaps even me." Leora's small chest rose and fell quickly. "I do not understand," she whispered. "But I want to." Solara's gaze softened, though her expression remained guarded. "Some things cannot be understood at once," she said. "They must be felt, and some must be earned." They walked together through the gardens, their steps slow and deliberate. Leora's tiny hand brushed against the petals of a glowing flower, and the light from the petals reflected in her eyes. Solara watched, fascinated by the way the small princess interacted with the world, so full of wonder, so unafraid of danger, so alive. And then, without warning, a ripple of darkness appeared at the edge of the garden. The shadow had returned, larger and more menacing than before. It moved with purpose, seeking the small intruder who had survived its previous attack. Leora froze, her heart racing. "The shadow," she whispered. "You do not face it alone," Solara said firmly, stepping in front of her. "Stay behind me." But Leora shook her head. "I am not afraid," she said. "I can help." The queen's eyes widened. "You cannot face this alone," she exclaimed. Yet before the shadow could strike, Leora's small body glowed faintly, her light mingling with the moonlight. She moved with grace, her size and speed giving her an advantage. The shadow hissed in frustration, unable to catch her. Solara watched in awe. The tiny princess had grown more powerful than she had realized, not through strength, but through courage and will. And as she observed Leora, something within the queen shifted. She realized that her heart, long closed and guarded, had begun to beat in rhythm with someone else's, a fragile, tiny heartbeat that dared to defy darkness. The shadow recoiled, finally retreating into the deeper darkness of the castle. Leora stood tall, small but unbroken, and looked at Solara with bright, hopeful eyes. "You are extraordinary," Solara said softly, her voice trembling slightly. Leora smiled, her energy mingling with the queen's. "Do you approve?" she asked. Solara turned away, hiding her expression, though her heart thudded like a drum. "I see you," she said finally. "That is enough for now." The bond between them had begun, delicate and forbidden but undeniable. They walked back to the castle, their steps slow, shadows lingering but powerless against the connection that had formed. That night, Leora curled up near the base of a flowering tree in the garden, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Solara watched from the balcony above, her heart unsettled by emotions she had long denied. The castle whispered around them, alive with secrets, shadows, and the beginnings of a bond that would shape the destiny of both queen and small princess. And somewhere deep in the castle, a presence older than time stirred, sensing that the bond between Solara and Leora was stronger than anyone could foresee, and that it might awaken forces neither of them were yet ready to face. The castle of Queen Solara had never been more alive or more dangerous. The corridors whispered secrets, the shadows twisted with subtle intent, and the very stones seemed to hum with an unsteady energy. Since Leora's arrival, the air felt different. The walls, which had stood silent for centuries, now seemed to watch, to respond, and to judge. Leora moved through the corridors carefully, small and swift, her mind racing with questions she could not yet voice. The shadow had returned in fragments, slipping through cracks in the castle walls, testing boundaries and probing for weakness. Leora had survived the previous encounters, but she knew that this time the danger was greater. And Solara, regal, distant, and commanding, was changing as well. The queen's heart, long frozen, now beat with a rhythm she could neither hide nor ignore. Leora had stirred something deep within her, a mixture of fear, longing, and an unacknowledged hope. But the queen remained wary. The castle, the shadows, and the responsibilities of her throne demanded vigilance, and she could not afford weakness, even for someone as small and compelling as the alien princess. That morning, Solara summoned Leora to the private chambers. The room was vast, filled with shelves of ancient books, scrolls, and relics of queens long past. The light of twin moons filtered through high windows, casting silver patterns on the stone floor. "Stay close," Solara instructed, her tone firm yet not unkind. "You are not safe here without guidance. The castle does not forgive mistakes." "I understand," Leora said softly, her small voice carrying a confidence that belied her size. Solara studied her for a moment. "Good, you must learn quickly. There are forces at work you cannot yet see." Leora followed the queen through the corridors, moving quietly, her eyes wide as she took in the ancient beauty of the castle. Statues of queens and kings lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow her. The mosaics on the floors glimmered faintly in the moonlight, telling stories of triumph, sorrow, and betrayal. "This castle remembers everything," Solara explained. "Every joy, every loss, every act of courage and folly. It responds to those who enter its halls, especially those who stir its heart or its darkness." Leora listened intently, fascinated. "And the shadow, the one that tried to hurt me?" Solara's eyes darkened. "It is a fragment of the castle itself, a piece of its sorrow and rage. It awakens when it senses vulnerability, danger, or emotion it cannot comprehend. You and your presence have stirred it." The small princess shivered, not from fear, but from the weight of the queen's words. "Then it is my fault." Solara's gaze softened briefly. "No," she said. "It is neither your fault nor mine, but you must be careful. This castle has seen the rise and fall of queens, the betrayal of kings, and the loss of those who dared to love too much." Leora nodded, understanding the warning, and yet her small form radiated determination. She would not hide, she would not retreat. She had come to this place to learn, to see, and perhaps, in some quiet way, to touch the heart of the queen who had turned away. Days passed, and the bond between the queen and the small princess deepened. Leora learned to navigate the castle, to sense the movements of the shadows, and to move quickly when danger threatened. Solara taught her the subtle arts of observation, strategy, and patience. But these lessons were not merely about survival. They were about understanding the delicate balance of power, trust, and emotional strength. One evening, as the twin moons rose high, casting silver light across the palace, Leora and Solara found themselves alone in the ancient library. Shelves of scrolls and books stretched to the ceiling, filled with knowledge both dangerous and profound. "You have learned much," Solara said, her voice softer than usual. "And yet there is still more to understand, not just about the castle, but about yourself." Leora tilted her head. "About myself?" "Yes," Solara said. "You are not only small in body. You are small in the sense that the world might overlook you. But in your courage, your curiosity, and your heart, you are vast. Vast enough to touch hearts, stir souls, and awaken power even this castle fears." Leora's eyes widened, and for a moment she felt the weight of the queen's words settle upon her. She was small, yes, but she was not powerless. She had survived shadows, navigated danger, and earned the cautious acknowledgement of the queen herself. As if sensing the growing bond between them, the castle itself seemed to shift. Walls creaked, corridors twisted slightly, and shadows lingered longer than they should. The castle had always been alive, but now it seemed aware of something new, a connection that both frightened and fascinated it. Suddenly, the shadow returned, moving faster and more deliberately than before. It slipped through the library doors, coiling around shelves, hissing with fury. Leora froze, her small hands gripping the edge of a table. "You must not face it alone," Solara commanded, stepping forward. "Stay behind me." But Leora shook her head. "I can help," she said. "I am not afraid." Solara's eyes widened. "You cannot face this alone," she exclaimed, though the queen's own heartbeat betrayed the truth. She did not know if she could stop the shadow without Leora's aid. The shadow hissed and lunged, but Leora moved with incredible swiftness. Her small size allowed her to slip between its smoky tendrils, evade its grasp, and shine a light that came from within, a faint glow born of courage, curiosity, and her unique energy. The shadow recoiled, confused and frustrated by her unexpected brilliance. Solara watched in awe. The tiny princess, so delicate and small, had become a force in her own right. She realized that Leora's courage was a power the castle had never seen before, a light that could dispel darkness, a will that could challenge the shadows that had haunted Solara for centuries. The shadow hissed one final time before retreating into the deeper darkness of the castle. Leora stood, small but radiant, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. "You are extraordinary," Solara said softly, her voice trembling just slightly. Leora looked up, her bright eyes meeting the queen's. "Do you approve?" she asked. Solara turned away, hiding the swell of emotion in her chest. "I see you," she said finally. "That is enough for now." For the next few days, the castle remained tense. The shadow lingered in hidden corners, testing boundaries, always aware of Leora's presence. Yet the bond between queen and princess grew stronger. They spent hours in conversation, teaching, learning, and simply observing each other. Leora learned about the queen's past, the loneliness, the betrayals, the weight of ruling a kingdom so vast and ancient. Solara learned about Leora's home among the stars, her tiny form carrying vast wisdom and her courage that defied her size. And yet every moment of closeness was tinged with danger. The shadow remained a constant threat, and the castle itself seemed aware of their connection, sometimes aiding them, sometimes testing them. One night, as the moons cast silver light across the palace gardens, Leora asked a question she had longed to voice. "Queen Solara, why do you turn away?" The queen paused, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the moons. "Because I fear what I might feel," she admitted quietly. "Because I have learned that desire, hope, and trust can lead to loss. I have ruled this kingdom for centuries, and I have seen hearts broken by attachment. Leora stepped closer, small yet unwavering. And yet, you are still here. You are still capable of feeling. I can see it. Solara looked away, her chest tightening. Perhaps, she whispered, but it is dangerous for both of us. The small princess smiled gently. I am willing to face the danger, she said, if it means I can stay with you. Solara's heart ached. She wanted to turn away to protect herself and to deny the fragile bond forming between them. And yet, something inside her had already begun to change. Leora had awakened emotions she had buried for centuries, hope, admiration, and a delicate trust that she could not ignore. As they walked through the gardens, the shadow stirred again, but it remained at a distance. The castle seemed to hold its breath, aware that the bond between queen and princess was growing stronger than any force it had ever encountered. The night was still, the air thick with possibility. Leora curled up beneath a flowering tree, her glow faint but steady. Solara watched from the balcony, her mind restless, her heart unsettled by feelings she had long denied. And somewhere deep in the castle, something older than time stirred, sensing that the bond between Solara and Leora was not merely a connection. It was a force powerful enough to awaken secrets, challenge darkness, and reshape the destiny of the kingdom itself. The fractured throne, long held by fear and solitude, was beginning to tremble. And in its trembling, a fragile hope was born, one that neither queen nor princess could ignore. The kingdom of Solara had never felt so alive or so fragile. The walls of the castle trembled faintly as if the stones themselves were aware that something momentous was about to happen. Shadows lingered longer than before, curling along corridors and stairways, but now there was a subtle tension in them, as though even darkness hesitated. Leora stood at the top of the tallest tower, her tiny form glowing faintly in the silver light of the twin moons. The wind whipped through her hair, lifting it like liquid starlight, and her eyes shone with determination. She had learned much in the days since her arrival, about the castle, the shadows, and most importantly, about the queen who had turned away. Solara emerged from the shadows behind her, regal and powerful, yet there was a vulnerability in her eyes that no crown could hide. She had felt the stirrings of her heart grow stronger, fragile as glass, but impossible to ignore. She had come to realize that this small princess, so delicate yet so courageous, had awakened something long thought dead within her. The shadow is stronger tonight, Solara said, her voice low but steady. It senses your presence, your courage, and the bond we share. It will test us in ways we cannot yet predict. I am ready, Leora replied, her voice small but unwavering. I have learned, I have grown. And I will not run. Solara's chest tightened. She had expected fear, hesitation, even retreat. But here was the small princess, radiant and unbroken, willing to face danger not out of recklessness, but out of courage and trust. Solara felt both pride and an ache in her chest, a longing she had not allowed herself in centuries. The wind carried a hiss from below, a whisper of darkness moving through the castle. The shadow had returned, larger and more menacing than ever, its smoky form shifting with unnatural grace. It coiled along the tower walls, seeking Leora, seeking the bond between the two of them, seeking the vulnerability that Solara and the small princess had inadvertently revealed. Stay behind me, Solara commanded instinctively, stepping forward, but Leora shook her head. I cannot, she said softly. Not now. If we face this together, we can end it. We can save the castle and perhaps even you. Solara's eyes widened. Me? Yes, Leora said, stepping closer, her small hands glowing faintly with energy she had only recently learned to control. You have carried so much alone, but you do not have to any more. For a moment the queen faltered. She had always believed that to show emotion was weakness, that attachment would only bring pain. But looking at Leora, the courage, the warmth, the unwavering trust, Solara felt a shift in herself. Her walls, centuries old and unyielding, began to crumble. The shadow hissed louder, sensing the bond between them. Its tendrils stretched toward the small princess, but Leora did not move away. Instead, she reached out her tiny hands, glowing brighter with a silvery light that reflected the twin moons above. Together, she whispered. Solara drew in a steadying breath. She stepped closer, letting the bond between them strengthen. Their energy intertwined, a subtle dance of light and emotion that filled the tower. The shadow recoiled, its smoky form twisting and hissing in frustration. It had never encountered such a force, Two beings, different yet connected, their courage and trust forming a light strong enough to challenge centuries of darkness. "You are not alone," Solara said softly, her voice trembling. "Not anymore." The shadow struck, curling around Leora, aiming to overwhelm her small form. But the bond between them flared brighter. Leora's light and Solara's presence combined into a force that pulsed through the tower, shaking the stones and rattling the air. The shadow screamed, twisting in agony, unable to resist the power of their unity. Leora's glow intensified. "We can end this," she said, her voice steady. "Together, Queen Solara, trust me." Solara's chest tightened as she reached out, not just in command, but in connection. Their hands met, and in that instant, their energies merged fully. A wave of silver light burst from the small princess, flowing into the queen, and together they directed it toward the shadow. The creature writhed, hissing, twisting, and finally, with a shudder that echoed through the castle, it dissolved into harmless tendrils of mist. The darkness that had haunted the halls, the shadows that had whispered threats and fear, were gone. The castle exhaled, and for the first time in centuries, it felt calm, peaceful, and whole. Leora collapsed to her knees, trembling from the effort, but smiling. Solara knelt beside her, placing a careful hand on the small princess's shoulder. "You were magnificent," Solara said softly. "I never imagined someone so small could carry so much strength." Leora looked up, eyes bright and full of wonder. "And you," she said, "you are not so different. You have the heart of a queen, and yet you almost let fear rule you." Solara's lips curved into a faint smile. "Perhaps," she admitted. "But now I see, now I understand that strength is not just in power or command, it is in trust, courage, and connection." The castle seemed to hum with approval, its ancient stones glowing faintly under the twin moons. Statues of queens and kings, silent for centuries, seemed to shimmer as if acknowledging the triumph of the bond between Solara and Leora. Days passed in a rare peace. The shadow had vanished, the castle had stabilized, and the bond between the queen and the small princess had grown stronger. Leora explored the palace freely, no longer merely surviving but thriving. She moved through corridors, climbed towers, and even played among the gardens, her small glow blending with the moonlight. Solara watched her often, from balconies, from chambers, or in quiet moments in the gardens. She had learned to recognize the warmth that Leora brought to the castle, not just light against darkness, but joy against centuries of solitude. The queen had begun to laugh softly again, a sound that echoed lightly in the halls and brought a strange sense of hope to those who heard it. And yet, the greatest change was within Solara herself. She had faced her fear, confronted the vulnerability she had long denied, and allowed herself to trust someone. The small princess had taught her that love, care, and connection were not weaknesses. They were forms of power, subtle yet unbreakable. One night under the twin moons, Solara approached Leora in the garden. The small princess looked up, glowing faintly, and smiled. "You have changed the castle," Leora said softly, "and perhaps even me." "And you have changed me," Solara replied, her voice quiet but firm. "I have lived for centuries, guarding my heart, my throne, my power, and yet I see now that the greatest power is the courage to open oneself to another." Leora stepped closer, tiny hands reaching out. "Then, will you let me stay?" she asked, a faint hope in her eyes. Solara knelt down, her crown glinting faintly under the moonlight, and looked into Leora's eyes. "You may stay," she said, "not because the castle allows it or because the shadows no longer threaten, but because I choose it, and I choose you." Leora's smile widened, and for the first time she felt fully at home, not just in the castle, but in the presence of someone who had once turned away from her curiosity, fear, and hope. In the days that followed, the castle transformed along with them. The shadows no longer crept silently through the halls. The stones seemed brighter, warmer, as if the energy between queen and princess had healed the ancient wounds of the palace. Light flowed into corners long forgotten, and the gardens flourished under the twin moons. Leora and Solara spent hours exploring the mysteries of the castle together, learning not only about the palace but about themselves. Leora taught the queen about courage, curiosity, and joy. Solara taught the princess about wisdom, leadership, and patience. And together they discovered that their bond, delicate yet unbreakable, was more powerful than anything the castle had ever known. One evening, as twilight fell over the kingdom, Leora asked softly, "Queen Solara, what now?" Solara smiled, the first full smile in centuries. Now we continue. We protect the castle, the kingdom, and each other, and we grow together. The small princess looked up at her, eyes shining. Together, she repeated, and in that moment the castle seemed to pulse with approval. The shadows had disappeared, the walls glowed faintly in moonlight, and the bond between the queen and the small one had solidified into something enduring, something unbreakable. The prophecy whispered of a small figure who would challenge the throne, and now it was clear. The challenge had not been to the queen's power, but to her heart. And the victory was not in conquest, but in trust, courage, and love. Leora curled up beneath the flowering trees in the garden, her glow mingling with the moonlight. Solara sat beside her, placing a protective hand over the small princess's tiny shoulders. The castle, alive with magic and memory, seemed to sigh in contentment. And somewhere in the distant stars beyond the kingdom, the light of the twin moons and the glow of the small princess shone brightly, a beacon of hope, courage, and the enduring power of connection. The shadow had been defeated. The throne had been healed. And in the heart of the castle, two souls, different yet intertwined, had found redemption, transformation, and the quiet, radiant joy of belonging. The kingdom of Solara had changed forever, not because of war or conquest, but because a small alien princess had dared to be herself, and because a queen had dared to turn toward her instead of away. And under the twin moons, in the stillness of the night, the castle whispered softly, "All is well, all is light, all is home."